Hi guys, welcome to Module 10. Hopefully you enjoyed last week's discussion on the Internet of Things. It's basically a shift towards mobile computing, so I thought it made sense this week to start to look at some mobile technologies and wireless security and begin to discuss how some of those technologies work and then also some of the security concerns that arise when we're looking at mobile platforms. We'll start with a brief introduction into what mobile computing actually is. You see I've listed here that transistor sizes have shrunk way down. This is thanks in large part to Moore's law. We can fit more transistors on smaller chips, so we're capable of putting more compute power in a small amount of space. So the net effect of that is that we're able to put computing devices in small electronics like tablets and phones. We can put them in wearable devices now like watches and headsets and glasses. And they actually are in a number of other scientific applications as well. We see them in space, we see them in submarine equipment, kind of all over the place now. And we're taking the computation and networking capabilities and making it a global thing so that wherever we go, in all sorts of different devices, we're able to communicate over the open internet. This is definitely a big paradigm shift because if you think of your desktop and typical computing devices and servers and things of that nature, you know that they have to be connected to a physical network. But we're lifting that requirement with mobile computing, so you see that there's no requirement to be attached to an actual physical network. We can take our phone or our watch or whatever smart device we have, we can walk around with it, and wherever we can receive radio frequency signals, we're able to transmit different types of data, video, voice, things of that nature, all over Wi-Fi, and a number of other technologies, optical technologies too. So we're moving towards this paradigm where we're always connected. So we're not just connected when we're sitting at a terminal, but we're connected when we're in the car. We're connected, for the most part, when we're at work, depending on the type of industry that you work in. And we're able to see more data and process more data all the time from different locations. So this enables a number of nice applications, but it also brings up a host of security concerns. So we're going to talk about both those things in the upcoming slides. I think the natural place to start is a discussion on mobile device security. I think back to typical desktop computing. Your computer is at your house. It's pretty easy to secure. You can lock your door. If you have a laptop, they actually make physical locks that you can attach to your laptop so that even if someone does steal it, they're not able to open it. So hardwired computers here, you see they have physical constraints, but they also have username and passwords to be able to access them. It's a little bit different when we think about mobile computing devices, specifically think of maybe a tablet or your cell phone. They still require passwords in a sense, but those passwords have kind of changed more into quick pins or biometric or some sort of swiping pattern. And so the physical lock obviously no longer comes into play. That would completely defeat the purpose of the mobile device. So the concepts of authentication and physical security constraints are the same, but they're implemented a little bit differently in a sense that makes sense. In a way that makes more sense for mobile computing. So instead of having traditional passwords, we mentioned that we either use some sort of PIN or some sort of swiping pattern on the screen in order to authenticate yourselves. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how traditional password hacking has changed as passwords have changed from a typical desktop device to a mobile device. So you see here that as part of traditional password hacking, something that used to be common was you can just try to brute force guess the password. If I could get access to your terminal, or even if I could access it remotely maybe, I can pretty easily guess a username, and then I could just go through every permutation of a password in a brute force fashion until I guessed it. If proper password policies are in place, it makes this probably prohibitively difficult. So another approach would be to actually steal the password file, and this is pretty common on Linux systems. If you view etc password, that's /etc/passwd, You can actually look at a list of all the usernames that exist on that machine, and you can get a hash of their password. So as you know, a hash is just a one-way function, so it's not like we can take those hashes and reverse them back into the password. But what we can do is use something called a dictionary or a rainbow table, which is a list of common passwords and the list of their hashes using very popular hash functions like SHA-1 or SHA-256 or MD5 or something like that. And from there, once I have your hash password from the system, I can just compare it to all the entries in my rainbow table. And once I find a matching entry for the hash, well, of course, I know what the hash corresponds to in plain text, so from my rainbow table, I can deduce what your password was from the hash. There's a few ways to protect against this, of course. I'm sure you're familiar. This happens to me every 3 months when I have to reset my time card password. You have a certain number of attempts it takes until you actually get locked out of the system. So commonly you'll see something like 3 or 5 attempts, and then once that happens, you have to take some sort of action to have your account unlocked. You have to respond to an email, you have to maybe call someone or email support or something like that. But until that happens, the account stays locked out. Another one that is kind of neat, I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of this, but there's an application called Gotya. And then every time you have a failed authentication attempt on your laptop or something like that, some sort of device that has a camera in it, it will actually take a picture to see who's in front of the keyboard. So it's unknown to the user the fact that that software is running. So if they try to brute force your password, they're sitting there at the console, it's actually going to take a picture of them, and it'll be easy to tell who was trying to hack into your computer. And I also decided to list logs here. They're pretty important. Most authentication services like LDAP or Active Directory for Windows authentication keep pretty copious amounts of logs. So for every failed attempt, for every successful attempt, for every time you're locked out, for every time your account gets unlocked, a lot of applications will keep pretty copious logs there. So if you're doing proper log analysis, you can also be aware of trends within your enterprise where people are trying to maliciously overtake the accounts. This certainly changes a bit, though, in large part when we start looking at mobile devices. The authentication methods are, as we said earlier, are a little bit different. We're usually going to be entering some sort of PIN, either maybe a 4, 5, or 6-digit number, or we might be swiping some sort of pattern across the screen, as you can see in the graphic here. And so the methods we can use to attack sort of apply to typical desktop computing in some ways, but there's also some pretty interesting differences and some cool attacks that arise as a result, so we'll talk about some of those. A very common basic attack is to do something that's called shoulder surfing. In a shoulder surfing attack, you basically place yourself or maybe a camera or some sort of recording device in proximity to the user, and you just flat out try to watch the password that's entered by the user. So this is certainly the case with desktop computing. If the user is sitting there typing their password, you might just watch the keyboard and see if you can deduce what their password is. And this is actually the same on a mobile device. I can just watch you when you unlock your phone. I can see if you swipe a particular pattern, or I can see if you punch in a particular PIN number. And from there, I can potentially steal your authentication credentials. But this is where it kind of gets interesting. We think about this notion of swiping a pattern on your screen. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this or not, but rather than just a 4 or 6-digit PIN, some authentication applications allow you to swipe some sort of pattern on the screen. So you train the app to recognize your pattern, and then from there on out, when that pattern is entered at the main screen, it will unlock the phone for you. So that's kind of neat, but there's a few issues here. So a group of computer researchers at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, they published a paper on an attack they call a smudge attack. And so as you know, when you swipe across the screen, you tend to leave an oily residue from your skin, will transfer oil from your skin to the screen. And if you take a careful look at the the oil that's left on the screen, you might be able to tell the pattern that a person has been swiping frequently. And this is actually, this can sort of be seen on alarm systems in houses too. Usually there's a 4-digit pin that might arm or disarm your alarm. So after a time, if you keep pressing the same 4 digits, you're going to notice a lot of dirt or some sort of residue forms around the keys that are commonly pressed. So once I know the 4 digits, I can, pretty easily brute force that and deduce what the alarm code was. So this similar idea here in the smudge attack. So rather than trying to brute force a pattern, of which there are too many to feasibly do, you can just check out the oil pattern and begin to guess someone's pattern. There's a few problems here. So as a mechanism for authentication, patterns are kind of known to be not so secure. The reason being, one, is difficult to enforce a pattern policy the same way you can for a password. So whereas you can ask for uppercase letters or lowercase letters or a certain length, or you can't repeat certain passwords from your previous history, some of those things, it's not as easy to do when trying to use a pattern for authentication. So there's definitely a lack of entropy here. People tend to use much simpler swiping patterns, and so it's definitely less secure. So it's kind of interesting to note too that the researchers, when they did this project, they noticed that the smudges, you'd think maybe when you put your phone in your pocket or something, and as the phone screen came in touch with maybe the soft cloth on the inside of your pocket or your jacket, or your t-shirt or something, you'd think that the smudges would rub off. But it turns out they don't rub off as easily as you'd think. So that's kind of a neat thing that the researchers realized. So they just basically used some decent lighting. They would, quote unquote, steal someone's device. They had a control set of devices, and with some special lighting and some really not so special cameras, they were able to lift the swipe patterns off of the phones. And they were able to do this with above 70 or 80% efficacy. So a pretty neat attack. So what some applications, when this class of attacks came to be known, what applications would do is they would force the user to unlock their phone by demonstrating their correct known pattern. And then they would have to swipe randomly across the screen to disrupt the oil pattern, whether it's back and forth or up and down, or wipe it with your palm or something like that. Applications began to do that because they knew smudge attacks were possible. So mobile devices also enable another number of different ways to authenticate a user. And a pretty common one that I think we see now is biometric authentication. So with the advancement in cameras on these small devices, it's very easy to just swipe your thumb or another finger right across the sensor on your S7 maybe. The cameras can also take pictures of your face or your parts of your eyeball and scan your retina and can do authentication that way. But while those methods themselves are somewhat secure, there is a problem here. So it's sort of like a side channel attack to these. In case you don't have access to the biometric authentication for some reason, they usually have a backup PIN that's required if you're using one of those methods. So in that case, the biometric authentication, if you have a PIN that does the same thing, it really reduces the security provided by the biometric and just reduces it to security that's equivalent to a 4-digit PIN. So in that sense, it's not particularly useful. It just becomes a brute force number problem at that point. But in order to attack biometrics, there was a Japanese researcher some years ago who came up with something called a gummy bear attack, and it turned out to be extremely effective. So it's a pretty neat method where the researcher actually took actual gummy bears, just straight up out of the bag, and would take the gummy bear and it would basically roll it over top of your fingerprint, or you may have left your fingerprint on your computer mouse, on a pen, a number of different places, on your phone. So they take the gummy bear, roll it over top of your fingerprint, And the gummy bear, the sort of sticky properties of it would actually allow it to pull the oil pattern of your fingerprint off of whatever device it was on. And so once you had that fingerprint, they were able to make a mold of it. So basically 3D print the fingerprint. Then they're able to use some sort of, gummy substance like an acrylic or a vinyl or something, and actually recreate the fingerprint. They could replay it, and they turned out to have really, really successful results. You see here is more than 80% effective in their study. So just using something pretty rudimentary really just completely undermines the security of some of these biometric authentication methods. So another thing that excuse me, that companies are allowing you to do today is use your wearable technology. So you may have a smart watch, you may have smart glasses, maybe some sort of smart pedometer or heart monitor, something like that. And the unique signatures that those devices contain, as long as you're in proximity to your computing device, you can use those to unlock the device. There's a few problems with that, is that one, you may not have that wearable device with you all the time. And so again, the same issue we had with the biometric authentication is that they usually make you set up a backup PIN, and so you're kind of undermining the security by just relegating it to the efficacy of a simple PIN. Another thing is that the devices don't have unlimited battery life. So, sensors die, watches, if they're not charged, they die, obviously. So battery life is a huge concern. If that device isn't working or the battery has died for some reason, you're stuck using a PIN again, which is really not so secure. And then those devices can be stolen. So it's easy for me to come in and come into your house and steal a smartwatch or something like that. So that kind of undermines the overall security of the system as well. So in order to combat that, in the event that a device is stolen or your fingerprint is stolen and someone can successfully authenticate to your device, as a fail-safe, you guys have probably seen this in Google, and certainly Apple iOS supports it as well. You can remotely wipe a device if it's stolen. So if you can't find your device, maybe you've tried your GPS, you can't locate it, it's not showing up, you can issue remote commands securely to that phone, and you can have it erase all the data that's contained on it. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the framework that supports remote wiping here in just a second. So the term for that framework and that methodology, we call it mobile device management, or MDM. And it is a framework that was set up to allow your phone to be able to communicate remotely with the server. And we can issue commands to the phone through the server and remotely wipe it, or send configuration commands to it, or lock the phone, all done remotely. So the way it works is the user installs some kind of remote application. So an example of this for an Android phone, I'm pulling up my phone here, Google has an app called Find Device. And it's a GPS device that allows you to geolocate it based on the current GPS data. But once you install the app and accept the terms of service, the app contacts an MDM server and says, hey, I'm interested in enabling remote capabilities for this phone, so I want to enroll. And so as part of the SSL exchange you've seen before, the server is going to respond with its certificate. So then us, the client, or more specifically our phone, upon receiving and verifying that certificate with the proper certificate authority, realizes that the phone is able to trust the device management server. So from there, the server continuously performs a push. So the server pushes a message out to the phone as a sort of check-in to make sure the phone's still online, to make sure that we're still in possession of that phone, a number of different things. And then that phone will respond with maybe an OK message. But it's also possible for us, instead of sending an OK message, we can send specific commands, as you can see, to maybe change the configuration to lock the phone, or even to remotely wipe it. And so once we give that command securely to the device management server, device management server can then push that command securely to that phone, and we can wipe it remotely. So this is nice in the sense that we can roughly make sure that an attacker can't get access to our data, even if they're able to commandeer our device physically. The issue is, though, that any device that's on there, once the phone's stolen and we do a remote wipe, we can't get any of that data back. So the simple solution to that is just to implement some sort of, recurring backup process that just backs up your data, whether it's your images, your videos, your contacts, your actual data, your browsing history, things like that, whatever you may need from your phone. It's just important to back that stuff up often if you're willing to do a remote wipe. So another thing I thought would be neat, since we're talking about mobile physical security, is a class of attacks that was released at DEF CON in 2011. And the attack came to be known as something called juice jacking. And if you think about USB, a lot of us have AC adapters that plug in via USB to our phone. So we just charge our phones from the wall, and it charges pretty quickly nowadays. But you've also seen chargers where you can plug the USB cord in directly without an AC adapter, plug one end into the charging station, and then the micro USB or whichever kind of adapter into the phone. You're probably familiar with the fact that USB can provide power, can charge your phone, but it's also commonly used for transferring data. Think of a USB stick or something like that. Well, the problem is that since a USB connection is capable of charging, it's also capable of transmitting or reading data at the same time. So most OSs, what they used to do, and maybe you see this, for example, I see it when I plug my phone into my car. I have a Toyota Camry. I get a message that pops up that says your device has been mounted as I can't remember the exact terminology, but basically my hard disk drive gets mounted to my car when I plug it in just via a USB cable. And so while I see the battery icon is definitely charging, that also means that whatever charging station we're attached to has read-write access to the file system mounted on our phone. So there are definitely cases out there, especially in airports. It's known that foreign intelligence agencies have installed malicious USB stations. And so while you think you're charging your phone, what's actually happening is some sort of malware can be uploaded to your phone, and that malware can either propagate, it can read data from your phone and basically spy on you or steal your data, or it can write data to your phone in the form of other pieces of malware. So it's a pretty dangerous condition, and it's very difficult to be able to tell just by looking at a USB station whether or not it's malicious. So one thing that iOS did, and Android does the same thing but accomplished it in a slightly different way. The OSs no longer allow your device to mount the hard disk or to mount your storage subsystem without asking for permission from you first. So it doesn't occur when you have the AC adapter, again, connected, but if you ever do a direct connection with just a USB cord to your phone, you'll probably notice that your OS gives you some sort of warning, and it asks you for permission to mount that hard drive specifically to avoid this type of attack.